All About Relationships is an engaging, lighthearted, and practical show designed to help people improve their relationships in meaningful ways. Hosted by Dr. Don Allen, a certified Gottman therapist, as well as an advanced trainer for the Institute. He is also certified in emotion-focused therapy. With over 40 years of experience in the field of psychotherapy, Dr. Allen is here to provide expert guidance on strengthening marriages, parent-child relationships, friendships, and more. Through insightful discussions, audience call-ins, and guest experts, viewers receive real-world strategies to enhance intimacy, communication, and overall relationship satisfaction. So now, please welcome the host of All About Relationships, Dr. Don Allen.
All right, hello and welcome back. I am Dr. Don Allen. This is a show called All About Relationships, working towards ideal marriages and loving, lasting relationships. Today we got a good show. We are going to talk about what I consider a technical word, but one that you definitely need to know, which is flooding. We're going to do that. And the name of my full title is Flooding: When Words Do Damage You Can't Undo. Very important. You know, I don't think we in society talk enough about, what we say and what we shouldn't say is important. People a lot of times speak their mind. They talk and they just give their opinion freely, but they don't necessarily realize the impact it has on people, and especially people they really care about. So we're going to talk about that today. This one, when I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly in relationships, this one's definitely in the ugly category. I like to talk about good because it's positive and upbeat, but we really need to pay attention to this one. So it's called flooding: when words do damage you can't undo. So I put some questions here that I always do that's really kind of designed to kind of help start us thinking about, why we should listen to this show and why you're going to be glad you did. So I always say safety first. I always say this is an educational show. It's not psychotherapy, but it's words that every one of us that have relationships need to pay attention to. So today we're going to look at flooding, and here's some of my thought-provoking questions. Have you ever said something in an argument that you immediately wish you could take back, but instead you kept going louder and faster and faster? Have you ever both needed just to stop talking and have a timeout, but you kept going louder and faster and even followed your partner to tell him one more thing? Ever done that? Have you ever both needed to just stop talking but started using profanities and put downs as you explained how right you are and how wrong they are? Did you ever get so heated in the relationship that you lose empathy for your partner? Okay. And really interest in anything that's their point of view. Now you're talking, you're in the argument, whatever, but you notice that, wait a minute, I've gotten to the point where I really don't care. I need to tell them off. Okay. If your partner forgave you, why do those words still seem to linger that you did in the relationship? Or why do those words keep coming back? When, oh gosh, I thought that was over. I thought we stopped talking about that. But yeah, here they are again. Okay. So do you believe I didn't mean it should erase the impact of what you said? Well, honey, I already said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it. Why are we still talking about it? Why do they keep lasting? We're going to talk about why they keep lasting. Okay. Have you ever had a heated argument in the evening and you woke up the next morning and you said to yourself, I can't believe I said that? And you notice the reason I put this one on here, the clarity that you have about, oh boy, that was bad. I can't believe I said it. But you didn't have it the night before, did you? Remember that. What do you and your partner remember after one of these? Do they remember the apology or do they remember the moment it happened? Okay. Now, remember in my show, I try to say, would this be relevant 2,000 years ago? And is it probably going to be relevant 2,000 years from now? And flooding has always been a part of us. And we're going to talk about why that is true, even before people started even knowing what flooding was. Okay. So I always say from the Gottman Institute, We want to seek to understand before we seek to fix. And this one's really important because we need to understand flooding. And I'm going to give you countermeasures so that when flooding starts to happen, you can head it away from the relationship and get back to the things that I've talked about that really, really do work. Okay. So, discussion. 2 weeks ago, I gave a guided tour through the John and Julie Gottman's relationship house. I invite you to go back and watch that one. Okay. Last week, we spoke about the destructive power of the four horsemen, okay, which are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling, which is not talking. So, those are really important to keep in mind foundationally. This is the third one that I think is a very foundational part of having good, healthy relationships. Okay, so we're going to look at the potential destructive power of words. Okay, so think about it. When you first start your relationship, what do? You fall in love, you say all these wonderful things to each other, you bond, you become your partner, and they become your very special, most important person in the world. How did we build that? We built that through a lot of loving, caring words and support and connection, right? So, what happens with flooding is it can undermine that. And that's one of the reasons why it is so destructive. So, what is flooding? Okay. Well, flooding, believe it or not, is a medical condition. Okay. It's kind of got a fancy word in the medical community. But how does it happen? Okay. Well, I kind of put a step by step together. So, when we start to be in an argument, we start to feel disconnected from our partner, our body kicks into action. So, this is a body thing. Okay. So, when we feel that, what happens is the most trusted person in your life, the person who you feel so linked to emotionally and physiologically, um, starts to be affected because we are attachment animals. Humans, mammals are bonding animals. We bond to one person, we bond to a family, we bond to a connected group. And it's very important. And our body really wants to do it because through hundreds of millions of years, humans have learned that they have survived by doing this. Very, very important. But the other thing is these bonding chemicals also help us feel safe and secure, but it also helps keeps us together and raise our offspring. So from an anthropological point of view, this is part of what's going on while we have our argument. Okay. So again, when we feel disconnected from our person, our biology goes into action. Okay, so how does that happen? Okay, well, when we start to feel that disconnection and we start to feel alone, like our partner doesn't like us, our body starts to secrete a hormone called cortisol. Now, cortisol is when we start feeling alone and not loved. So, okay, so think back when you were a kid, when people would try to shun us, everybody probably takes a turn on that. And then we start to feel alone or not invited or, kicked off the basketball team because we're not good enough or something. We secrete cortisol from that. That's a lonely feeling. Okay. So that's important. So when we're feeling alone from our partner, we start to secrete that chemical. Okay. But during the escalation of our fight, people start thinking, well, wait, you're not listening to me. Well, wait, you don't care about my point of view. I feel like you're telling me off. So those kind of things create something in our mind that makes us say, how dare you? Well, when we get a how dare you, our body starts to secrete a hormone called adrenaline. You know, adrenaline comes up a lot of times when we're angry or we have to do something that's really important. Our body wants to give us extra strength and extra focus and everything. So adrenaline starts to kick in. But when these two chemicals working together start to increase in our system, it begins to, believe it or not, raise our pulse. Okay, so let's say, I'm going to make it up. Let's say your pulse is 70. Now, all of a sudden, you're starting to get agitated. Now it starts to go 75, 80, 85. It starts to move up. Okay, now there's a reason for that because our body is springing into action. It's gearing up to say, look, you're alone. You better protect yourself. Okay, and maybe your partner's is too, or maybe you're kind of calm, but your partner's escalating. You've got to watch all that, right? But when the danger becomes too great, okay, from that rising, our body goes and it turns off a brake that we have in our system that keeps our pulse at 70. So now that brake kicks off and our pulse goes over 100. Okay. When that happens, and this is done with the vagus nerve, what happens is it shuts down our thinking brain. Okay, now I really want to slow down and emphasize that. It shuts down your thinking brain, the ventral vagal brain, the prefrontal cortex, whatever you want to call it, but it shuts it down. So it's not in action anymore. But why that is because you have another part of your brain, the thalamus, turns that off, but it turns on the amygdala brain. Okay, now that's very important because what happens with the amygdala is that it is designed for reacting. It's not designed for thinking. Okay. So as it's reacting, you start getting symptoms that shows that's happening. What are the symptoms? Well, you're really not capable of thinking anymore. So you go high gear into your argument. We notice symptomatically that you tend to talk faster and faster, louder and louder, and we tend to repeat ourselves over and over. Now again, the amygdala, its goal is to keep you either fight, flight, or freezing, right? So fighting is yelling at your partner. Saying heck with you and running away from them is running away. And then just shutting down is called stonewalling. So none of those you want to be having happen. And you don't want to keep arguing because what's going to happen is bad because your thinking brain is turned off. Okay. So part of what can happen with that is we start saying things that we don't mean because the goal now is to get out of the fight by attacking our partner. Okay. So, what happens with that is that you really want to slow down, repair, and accept influence from our partner. But you can't do that because the part of your body that does that is the thinking brain and it's turned off. Okay. It's off. It's not working. It's offline. Okay. Another thing you want to do is have empathy for your partner. Sorry, empathy lives in your thinking brain. So now you can't have compassion. You can't listen to what they're saying. Your ears kind of more and more turn off. If you really get flooded, you get tunnel vision, right? And part of the problem is kind of overwhelmingly, we start to say things we really don't mean, but it damages the relationship. Okay. It starts to really do that. So, it's interesting too, because so I just told you, well, I said it when I'm flooded. I said that when I'm flooded. Ironically, those are the things we tend to remember the most. We don't remember the part we talked about when we weren't flooded, but those insults, those contemptuous words, those critical words with raised voice, they resonate, they land. Okay, so now we go from intention to impact. We may not have intended to do that, but the impact on our partner is really, really bad. That's one of the things I said is you wake up the next morning and you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that, but that lingers. Okay. You linger. And when you start using especially contempt, that's one of the biggest predictors of people who break up. So these things, it's the old, you can't unring a bell. Once the words are out, they're out. So we need to really pay attention and slow down and say to ourselves, wait a minute, do I flood? Well, the answer is everybody floods. And the next question you might want to ask yourself is, well, when's the last time I remember flooding? And what did it look like for us? And how did that happen? Or maybe you say, boy, things keep coming up that I said 2 months ago in that heated argument I had. Well, it hasn't been repaired. Okay, it hasn't been repaired. So these are the kind of things that we really want to start to pay attention to. So in our next segment, we've got some really good questions from the mailbag, and we're going to explain this further. So let's go take a commercial break, and we'll be right back with the mailbag. I look forward to seeing you and talking then.
Mike Zorich, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor.
Nancy Zorick, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorick has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Okay, we're back, and today we're going to go to our second segment, which is our mailbag segment. Found some really good questions that I think really relate to this idea of flooding. And people don't often, describe the flooding. They describe something that is flooding. So listen for it as I do this. So our first one, okay. It says, during arguments, I sometimes say really harsh things, like, maybe we shouldn't be together. I don't actually mean that, but it comes out when I'm overwhelmed. My wife says she can't forget it. It stays on her mind, right? She can't forget it. Even if I didn't mean it, why does it still count so much? And why would I even say it in the first place? Okay. One thing I want to talk to you about with regard to flooding is we aren't in our thinking brain. So why does it come up? Well, it comes up because we just want to get out of the fight. So one of the things our amygdala brain's saying is, get away from this person. This person is dangerous. It's a danger cue. Not that they really are. But when we're in the heat of this, our brain goes to saying whatever it thinks is going to work to escape the situation. So you can hear that. Why do I do it? Well, because the thinking brain's turned off and your amygdala is really trying to get you to escape. Okay. So your brain, especially under stress, does not store conversations equally. One of the things we know from research, especially at the Gottman Institute, that feelings and emotions create a hierarchy by which we do things. Okay. So if you have something that's really, really pending and you get anxious about it, the reason you're anxious is because your body realizes it has to pay that close of attention to it. My joke with that is, if you've ever really tried to keep talking or working when you really have to go to the bathroom, eventually all you think about is, I got to go to the bathroom. Well, the emotion, the feeling of urgency starts to override everything else, right? So when we're flooded, we have an urgent state with that. So our body is prioritizing the threat, right? So what happens is the nervous system, your body's nervous system, starts trying to protect it from happening again, right? So your partner may forgive your words, but their nervous system is remembering them and giving it priority. Okay, so that's what's happening. So when you ask me, how come that happens? Well, that's what I think. Okay. So the next one is, let's see. My husband keeps bringing up something that I said months ago during a fight. I've apologized multiple times. At what point does it become unfair that we can't move on? Okay. Well, part of the problem is that this is what we call an unresolved conflict. Okay. So the fancy word in Gottman, go back to that episode where I showed you the relationship house, is when you have an unprocessed conflict, our body keeps snagging examples of how that's been happening to protect itself. Okay. So, there's another one. They did this. They said this again. Well, they didn't do this. Well, when I come home, I bet this is going to be done. So that's called negative sentiment override. Okay, so what? In other words, your body isn't defaulting to positive things. It's going to that negative belief system that's been created because of the urgency of the danger. So that's one of the reasons why I say repair is your secret weapon, because repair helps get rid of negative sentiment override and helps resolve past conflicts. So when this person is saying, although I've apologized many times, at what point does it become unfair and why can't we move on? That's why, right? So it's interesting, but back to why this is so important that we talk about flooding, because flooding not only creates this, but we stop noticing all the wonderful things about our partner, which makes us feel even more alone. That attachment distress that I talked about, because we are bonding animals, begins to weigh on the relationship house. That's why it's ugly. So that's why we want to get rid of this. And we're going to talk about ways to not only see it, but to really give priority and urgency. You want to give urgency to something. That's why we give it to this. Okay. Okay. So, next question. We can have 10 good conversations, but one bad argument where something hurtful is said and seems to erase all of it. Well, remember, again, from Gottman's research, is that negative comments weigh more than positive ones, okay? Especially big ones, because again, back to this urgency. So one of the things we know from Gottman's research is that you need to have 5 minutes of positivity for every 1 minute of negative, okay? So what'll happen is this, and this is the way I describe it. If you put a $5 bill on the table, you need 5 ones to equal it. Well, because negative comments are like $5 bills, we need to make sure that we neutralize it with that 5 minutes of positivity. Now, again, I've mentioned this before. When people are in really good, connection, they're usually 20 minutes to 1 minute positivity. But you can't go under 5, because when you do, it starts making this negative sentiment override happen. The other problem you're going to get into with that is that we have to begin to think about the maintenance of our relationship in positive ways. So that's why we need to have a system for this. Okay, a system for this. Okay, let's see. Let's go to another one. When I feel overwhelmed, I go quiet because I'm afraid to say something damaging. My partner then feels like I'm emotionally unavailable. I'm going to plug in my computer because it's running out of energy. So what happens with this one is that this person has decided the best way to deal with it is to go to stonewalling. Let me read it again. When I feel overwhelmed, I go quiet because I'm afraid I'll say something damaging, right? So this person is saying, look, I don't want to say anything bad, so I don't want to say anything at all. That's okay, but you can't go to where your partner is feeling dismissed or ignored. In our third segment, we're going to talk about how to do this in a way that you do it well and you don't have to go to stonewalling, right? But fight, flight, freeze, this could be a freeze motion, right? I don't know what to say, so I don't know, so I just stop. But the partner doesn't feel like you're there. The scene, soothe, safe, secure, right? So I will admit what they're saying is I'd rather shut down than say something inflammatory. That's probably better. But again, to use stonewalling to do it is not. All right. So, one of the reasons why we talk about that is we're shifting to intention, good intention, right? But again, we have to watch intention versus impact. We cannot intend to hurt somebody, but the impact is that we do. And when we're flooded, a lot of times we either raise our voice and it sounds harsh, or we say so many words and some of those land, right? Well, that's the impact, right? So it's really physiological that's happening with this. And that's one of the reasons I say. Now, let me just go back to this idea of negative sentiment override. Okay. Instead of them saying, hey, my partner loves me now, it goes to maybe they don't respect me. Maybe they don't really want me. Maybe that's what they really think about me. Okay. So what happens is these unrepaired emotional injuries begin to really cause the problems that we're talking about. Okay. So this is where we just really, really have to have a system that we see it coming and we avoid it before, hopefully in time, before we're flooded. But right now, today, what we're talking about is to see flooding, recognize it, and having a countermeasure that will really, really help us avoid those kind of things. Okay. So, in general, with these questions, where we would need to do is to have that system. Okay. So, one of the things I want to talk about with regard to the amygdala is, let's say it's a fall day and you're putting your trash out. Okay. And, it's kind of windy, leaves are dancing around your sidewalk, kind of brisk. And right before you put your trash down, you notice that you're probably about 1.5 feet away from a raccoon. The next thing you know is you're probably about 50 foot away from that raccoon. You may be 50 foot away and you didn't even know how you got there. All of a sudden you look down and say, whoa, and then your body got you away from that thing. Okay. So you almost have a reflex action. Well, in that instant, what happened was your amygdala kicked in and it said, I don't care what you're thinking, get away from that raccoon. Right. So you don't remember what happens. People describe this all the time with flooding. They have a crisis or a catastrophe happens. Maybe there's smoke in the building and everybody runs out. A lot of times people can't tell you everything that happened to get them out of that building, but they know they got out of that building. See, the amygdala, that's what it does. It doesn't think, right? It doesn't think. And as a result of that, sometimes we do things that are either non-conventional, not social, right? You think of, concepts like stampeding, where people all of a sudden start running and people get knocked over. And the next thing you know, people get trampled or something terrible, God forbid. But, why would people do that? Well, they don't mean to, right? But the impact of it is the person who got knocked over sure knows about this. So we want to look at, why those things happen in our body, and we want to have countermeasures from that. Okay, because otherwise, we can be in real trouble with our partner. So, as we go along, part of what I want to do is I want you to pay attention to, what are we going to do when we start to have one of these fights? How do we recognize, I think we're beginning to upregulate? How do we get it so that we stay friends and connected and disconnect from the argument long before we start having flooding and horsemen and these kind of issues that are so damaging to our relationship? So I'm going to go ahead and break a little early right now, but we're going to come back because I need some extra time to talk to you about countermeasures to flooding. So let's go ahead and go to break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk to you about how to solve this and make sure it doesn't affect or impact your relationship.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
All right, and we are back. So we are about to go into some more detail about how to disconnect flooding from our lives in a way that we can keep lightning in a bottle and to make sure that relationship house, that sound relationship house that Gottman has given us and I've talked about, stays really solid. Okay, so we're going to be doing that. Before I do, let me go ahead and put up my information. Okay, I always like to do this sometime in the show. If you are interested in talking to me, please feel free to take this information and reach out. You might have a question that you'd like on the mailbag. You might have a topic that, boy, I get stuck on this one. Don, can you talk about this one in an episode? Love those. We'll definitely entertain them. Okay. Remember, if you go on to, for example, YouTube and you go to my show, please click on you like it if you do, and also that you subscribe. We're trying to get more and more people to subscribe now. And it's nice. We've already got a good population going, but I always want more people in our club. So please make sure that you do that. So like I said, I'd like to keep this up. And then when you come back, you can always refer to this and use it for contacting me. So let's talk about these antidotes. Okay. So I'm going to say again, conflict is not the problem. It's how we handle the conflict and how we handle our bodies when we begin to get upset. When we're little kids and we become overwhelmed in our little bodies, our parents sometimes puts us in timeout, not to shame us, not to make us feel bad, but to slow our bodies down so we can think again and begin to take some of that good information they want to teach us in the moment, right? Like pick up your toys or, you got to listen or, don't run on the sidewalk or something that, might be dangerous to us. So yeah, they got to get all that information, but they can't be overwhelmed when we try to give it to them. So it's not the conflict, it's how we handle it. So what I'm going to give you is what the Gottman Institute recommends. Now, I always say, please visit the Gottman Institute. They have a very big following. They have a lot of information about flooding that you can get to really go and learn about this even in more depth. So I always want to plug them. I know I enjoy going there, and they have quite a following that they have information for. Okay. So the first thing we need to begin to do is to understand what flooding is. Well, I've already given it to you. The second thing we need to do is recognize when we are flooded. Okay. Now, right now, the beginning of all this, we're probably going to recognize we're flooded after we're flooded, because we haven't put into place a lot of things that can say, look, I'm approaching being flooded. So we want to recognize when we are flooded. So what I mentioned earlier, our cortisol and adrenaline are starting to go up. We're starting to get louder. We're starting to get more heated. We're less able to listen to our partner, right? We're less able, we kind of get to where we just want to win the argument. Those kind of feelings are happening. All right. But what I want to also have you do is to pay attention to some of the things that are happening in your body. So these things you're noticing. Well, the next thing you want to look at is that your pulse goes over 100. I mentioned that earlier. Okay. So I have a smartwatch on, if I can pull it up here, and I clicked it right when we were on break, and my pulse was about 72. All right. Well, that's a little high for me because I take my pulse off and on during the day to see where it is. And the reason it's a little higher is because I'm talking to all of you and I'm really paying attention and I'm really focusing on what to say to you. So my body is more alert and it's upbeat with that, but it's not getting to where I'm flooded. It's just up because I'm up from doing this. But when you're arguing and your pulse goes over 100, I want you to see that as a warning sign to get out of flooding. Now, if you're really athletic, if you're really, somebody who or their body's really fit, it may be less than 100. Okay. But for most people, we like to start it as if your pulse is over 100. Right. Mine is if it's markedly different from what it's usual. And I know what flooding is and I know when I'm about to flood. But I would have to say if I was arguing with my wife and my pulse was at 80, 85, I'm already starting to suspect I'm flooded. Okay. So we're going to look at that and you're going to get more sophisticated. But for right now, let's just stay to the basics, right? Another thing that you can do is check your body is I know for me, my face gets numb right here when I tend to be flooded. Now, that may not happen at all for you, but that might be a clue. Some people, their mouth gets really dry, I mentioned earlier, we start to get louder and talk faster. Pay attention to these things, right? The other thing I want you to do is after you recognized a flooding episode and you get away from it and you come back and you reconnect and you repair, at some point, you want to ask yourself, what did my body feel like right before I flooded? Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get it sophisticated so that we can stop long before the symptoms of flooding have taken over, and that's what we're recognizing. Okay. All right. So the next thing that happens is you need to have a protocol. You need to have a way that you two do and you two go to when flooding is happening. Okay. So one of the things that I would want you to do is to develop some kind of a code word, maybe like code blue, like they say at ERs or something. I don't know. But what you want to do is to come up with one. I always kind of like this. If one of you two are arguing and you go like this, and then the other person goes, okay, all right, I think, you're saying we're flooded. If one person says you're flooded, act like you're flooded and go into the protocol, and don't ever cry wolf with this. Hi, honey, I'm home. Hey, I'm flooded. I got to go watch the basketball game. No, not that. You want to make sure that you really keep this serious and that you know how to go through it. It's kind of like you wouldn't pull a fire alarm. Don't do it with this either. So let's say you're starting to argue, things are really getting agitated. One of you goes, oh my gosh, I've done this before. They go like this. And the other person goes, okay, I like to do this. This is just me. But this stops us from talking, because the next thing we want to do is to keep yelling at our partner, one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. This is to remind us not to, right? Okay, so now you've stopped the argument successfully. Way to go. The next thing you want to do is to separate from one another. Just go to different rooms, just like we do with kids. Very wisely, we put them in timeout. We're putting ourselves in a timeout. That's excellent. That's wonderful. So go to different places, right? And then what you want to do next is you want to stop thinking about what ticked you off, right? And I wanted to say this and one more thing. And that's all from the cortisol and the adrenaline. So what you're going to do here, and like I said, this is where I invite you to go to the Gottman Institute, because they can do this in much more depth. For the purposes of my show, I'm not going to go through the whole flooding protocol. That would take me about 40 minutes. But what you want to do is you want to go to this quiet place and settle down, and you want to start doing large breathing. Breathe in, make your lungs get a full load of air, and then breathe it out slowly. And I want you to just keep doing this. Now, for me, I breathe through my nose and out through my mouth. All right, but you want to do that and get a good lungful of air, almost like this. Right? And then hold it for a little bit of time, and then breathe it out twice as slow. And I want you to do that for a while. Take a good 10 minutes of just breathing slow. Don't do it so fast you hyperventilate, but just do it so you're breathing in and breathing out. What this does is it slows your heart down. Okay. But you got another problem, and that is you got a lot of cortisol and adrenaline in your body. So what you want to do now is you want to make big motion with your big muscle groups, your arms, your legs. You want to stretch up. You want to stretch down. You want to do it in slow motion, but you want to do it with your whole major body. You want to do it with your back. You want to tighten your muscles in your stomach. You want to tighten your neck. But I want you to take about 25 minutes to do the breathing, and I want you to take that to do the motion, to really get it out of your body while you're thinking about something else. Now, another thing that you can do that's really good is you can have your favorite music ready to go. I actually, because I write music, I will get on my piano over there. Let me see if I can do this there. And I go ahead and I start trying to just write music that's difficult to play. Because then my mind gets on to where the music is, and I'm not thinking about what upsets me. Plus, I'm using both hands while I'm playing, right? Which, again, helps me move my body movement. So whatever that does for you, that's fine. Some people take a walk, but some people get really anxious when their partner leaves the house to take a walk. They might be afraid that you're going to stay away for a long time, or maybe they had some things go on when they were a kid that really makes them feel abandoned. All that stuff you all have to figure out. But what you do need to do is to make sure that both of you can rely that there's safety and connection with one another while you're doing it. Okay. So now you're breathing, you're moving your body, you're getting your mind off of that. So after a while, what's going to happen and it usually takes about 25, 35 minutes, check your pulse again. And then the other thing is check if you can think, right? Check if you can think of the other person's point of view. Think if you can relate to them. Even if you disagree, if you can kind of say to yourself, well, I can kind of see why they think that, or I can kind of see this one point makes sense to me. Those are signs that your brain is coming back online, your thinking brain. The other thing that's happening is that you're able to have empathy and compassion and connection with your partner. Okay. Another thing that you can do is start thinking about those 5 positives. You have 5 things you really appreciate about your partner in your own mind. And just go through, well, they did this for me today, and I really, really like that. I really appreciated that. And oh my gosh, the other, I was driving to work and I was thinking about something important, and they called me and said, hey, just thinking about that big thing you have at work and hope it goes well. I'm thinking about you. Just things that, really, really show a lot of that fondness and admiration you have for your partner. If you can start doing that, chances are you're coming back from this upregulated state. Okay, so now you're settled. The other thing I want you to do is to go back and check in with your partner. I love statements like, hey, are you able to talk yet? Or, hey, are you feeling more settled? I wouldn't use words like, are you calmed down? Because some people can hear those as fighting words. But I would say, you want to just kind of have a lot of compassion in your voice. Hey, where are you at? And then, one of the things that you can start doing is just kind of repairing with each other, give something that you wish you could have done better. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be that. It could just be like, boy, that discussion we were having really got the best of me. I'm glad I took a minute to get back. I just want to come back and connect with you. Right. Right. Really reassure your partner that you love them and you're there for them, and then have it come back to you. Next thing you can kind of start doing is, like I said, just take responsibility, which is the antidote to defensive horsemen. We were talking, and all of a sudden I made the argument more important than what we were talking about. I don't know why I did it, but I'm sorry. I want to get back to this. What we're talking about is important to you, and I want to know your point of view. So get back into that really caring kind of feeling and kind of state. Okay. Once you've gone back and forth, and this is very important, and that both of you feel like the other person's tuned in on what was concerning for you. Then, back to, the what went wrong question that you've got. Sometimes we need to get away from that a little bit before we really tackle it. So I'm kind of big on having people, say, let's get back to this when we can talk about it better. Now, again, if it's in my office and I'm doing this for a living, I don't mind people getting back into it because I'm there, right? But sometimes, even in my life, if I've got a situation where, my wife and I have something and we're still pretty charged up by it, that's probably not the time to go back into it because it may very well lead into flooding. So just, know the right time to go back to that. Okay. So just, yeah, the big question there is, can you stay out of the fight? Can you get back to where you don't upregulate and flood? Okay. So the other thing about that is you do need to eventually go back to what the conflict was so that you can, kind of process that. We call it an aftermath discussion. But then it's very important to get to a point where we can say, what can we do to just forget about this one? Sounds like this one we just miscued. We just crossed up, and doggone it, it got the best of us. How do we just say, look, those things are going to happen between couples, and let's just not worry about it. It'll be a lot easier to put that behind you because you have not flooded and you didn't say a lot of caustic words, especially contemptuous words that make your partner start to really think about that. Okay. So these are some of the things that when we get to our next segment, we're going to have that fun thing we all do when we go and we talk and use some of the stuff I gave you today. So I am actually going to refer to this segment when I give you the exercise we're going to do this week at home for fun. with our partner. Always remember safety first. So why don't we go ahead and take a break? We'll come back for the fourth segment. And like I said, I'm going to give you something real fun we all are going to do, myself included, to see if that makes our relationship better. We'll see you shortly.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
All right. Well, one of the things I like to start out with that I want to remind you of is I sometimes talk about what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is all the things that we're supposed to do, not only in a relationship, but what the very best relationships do all the time. That's the good. Having a good, sound relationship house, that's the good. The bad is we're going to have conflict from sometimes, but conflict isn't bad. It's how we handle it. But we're going to have things in our life that just go wrong. Okay. And we've talked a little bit about those conflicts. The ugly is when we really start using the 4 horsemen and the flooding, because these are the things that really start to affect the relationship house, especially contempt. Contempt is when we describe our partner as defective. Criticism is pointing out a lot of how our partner does it wrong. And we can even parlay that into, with harsh startup, and we can actually kind of build up a habit of just really going out of our way to notice everything our partner does wrong. Then we get into the absence of 5 minutes to 1 minute positivity. This builds resentment, right? But when things really get to the point where they're flooded, this is where a lot of this stuff is invited into the relationship, and very quickly and very caustically. So we want to be very careful, not only with the horsemen, but especially when we're flooded. So what we're going to do today is, again, back to a fun exercise. You all aren't arguing now. You want to see each other. You want to have a nice relationship. You want to learn what goes into a great relationship, right? So that's what we're doing today. So what we're going to do is, for our fun exercise, is I want you, again, to plan a time for you and your person to meet. Put something down. So don't blow it off or don't not show up for it. Preparation. Before you meet, I want you to think of a time when you thought both of you were flooded. Okay, this is going to help you take some of the stuff I've taught you today and put it into practice, right? Okay, and what I want you to do is think of examples of how you may have handled your flooding poorly, where you thought, when that happened, I started thinking this and I really blew it. And this is how I blew it. That's taking responsibility, right? Invite your partner to do the same. Now, what I mean by that is invite your partner to, go back and think of a time when you both were flooded. So do all the same things you just did, so you both are ready for each other. But then they can talk about how they handle it poorly. but you're listening for the symptoms. You're listening to how we do it, because how you flood may be very different than how I flood. Okay. So then what you're going to do is you're going to watch the third segment of my show today. You're going to watch what I just talked about. How do you not flood, right? So then what I want you to do is, after you do that, is to sit down together and create your own fire drill, to create your own flooding protocol, to think of, okay, if this happens to us again, and by the way, it's going to, right? And I should say too, sometimes people can flood in about 2 seconds. I mean, it can go that fast. So I kind of describe it as a general buildup, but you hit a pet peeve, you hit something that's really been annoying for a while, this can go quick, right? This can go quick. So what I want you to do is to say, okay, okay, let's pretend we're talking right now and somebody gets flooded. So what are we going to do? We're going to do this. Are we going to say, code blue? Are we going to remember one of the times we flooded that really got ugly, and that'll be our code word? Like getting on the interstate or going to the grocery store or something that you two remember was a flooding thing. Just don't use a lot of words. That's what I love about this one. It's real quick. All right. But something quick. Now, if that happens, both of you, right? Both of you, stop talking. Then what I want you to do is to go to your private space. Now, if you guys are doing this exercise, you could say, okay, I'm in the bedroom, and where are you? Well, I'm over in the office. Okay, so we're going to do that. So now let's pretend we're both in our places. Let's show each other how we're going to move our body. Let's show each other how we're going to breathe. Some of you guys, I can give you ideas, but boy, for you yoga people, for example, you know how to do these breathing things probably better than I do, right? But the point is, good lung full of air, hold it, let it out twice as slow, and do it for a while, right? Now, again, you got that going. That's telling your heart to settle down. Now you're going to be moving your body, right? And you're doing these things. And then after a while, you want to check in. If you're in your own space, you might put your own music on. You might be doing something that you like to do that really helps settle you down. You know all those things far better than I do. So do something that makes your body settle down. So then what you want to do is say, okay, we did all that. Now let's come back and let's pretend we're back from that. And how are we going to repair? Go through what I just mentioned, right? Now, at the very end of that, you might talk about how you both like to handle an argument that's unsettled, right? Then you can say, well, what I'd like to do is wait another day, but I don't want to wait more than a day. I want to do this within 2 days. What do you think? And then come up with some kind of a protocol, and then really stick to it, right? Really stick to it. So this is kind of where that is. At the end of it, just go back to talking about how wonderful you think each other is, right? So you've got this protocol. The next thing I want you to do is, on your own, don't have to have your partner for this, practice at least 2 times till our next episode about the flooding protocol, so it's more in your mind. Remember, we used to practice fire drills all the time in school. You just didn't do it once. So really, you want to build up that muscle memory so you know what you're doing. So this is really important. So I want you guys to pay special attention to it. I'm Dr. Don Allen. This is all about relationships, working towards ideal marriage and loving, lasting relationships. We'll be back 1 o'clock Eastern time next Wednesday. I'll have another exciting episode for you. I look forward to seeing you then. Please go to my website and subscribe. Have a good week, and I'll look forward to talking about some cool stuff next time. Take care.
While All About Relationships is educational and entertaining, it is not a substitute for therapy, counseling, or professional advice, but an informative space for learning and growth. So tune in each week for an engaging and reliable approach to your relationships, ensuring viewers with practical tools to create deeper connections in their daily lives. Whether tackling conflict resolution, emotional intimacy, or family dynamics, this show is your go-to resource for anyone looking to foster healthier, happier relationships in a supportive and lighthearted environment. Every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern.